In 1990, Calliope's father, Thaddeus Sterling, returned from the South after successfully trading his first batch of digital watches. He hit the jackpot, turning their family into the renowned $10,000 household, the most famous wealthy family in Whisper Creek. Fearing that Calliope would be taken advantage of in the future, Thaddeus decisively told her to choose a boy among several poor but academically gifted male students. He planned to sponsor the boy's college education and, conveniently, raise him to be her future husband and lifelong companion. In her past life, Calliope had chosen Ethan Blackwood, the one who looked most like a movie's leading man. He wore a white shirt washed until it was yellowing, spoke gently, and had incredibly pure, clear eyes. She had showered him with money, buying him a voice recorder, hiring tutors, and even paying off his gambling-addicted mother's debts 3 separate times. On the day he agreed to marry her, the whole town marveled, saying she had finally managed to buy the moon and bring it home. But that moon had never once shone on her. The person he truly loved was the bespectacled clerk at the local bookstore. That girl understood poetry, understood modern literature, and understood his so-called soul crushed by reality. Ethan despised Calliope for reeking of money. He despised her father for constantly talking about profit margins and wholesale prices. He even despised the leather shoes she bought him, claiming that wearing them felt like walking in shackles. As soon as her parents passed away, he swept away all of her family's business funds and eloped with that bookstore clerk to the city to open a book cafe. When Calliope chased after them, Ethan's mother turned around and viciously bit back, spreading rumors that Calliope had been impure before the marriage and that the Blackwood family had merely been tolerating her all these years. Those gossipy remarks acted like daggers, eventually forcing her to swallow an entire bottle of sleeping pills. Hey guys, it's easy to be fooled by a perfect facade. Today, we're diving into a satisfying rebirth story where the female lead finally sees through the fakes and completely flips the script on her fate. Let's get into it. When she opened her eyes again, she saw her father slamming a thick stack of cash onto the table. Go ahead and pick, sweetie, he said cheerfully. Thaddeus Sterling was sitting at the heavy oak dining table, his elbow resting on an old ledger. His face bore the cautious yet proud expression of an overnight nouveau riche. Calliope, pick one yourself. In the yard at that moment, 4 male students stood in a line. One had narrow shoulders and evasive eyes. Another was tall and lanky, wearing torn, worn-out shoes. One had his head bowed, nervously wringing the hem of his shirt, his ears as red as if they were on fire. And the last one was Ethan Blackwood. That face was overwhelmingly familiar, so familiar that Calliope's throat grew tight, and the sharp, acrid taste of sleeping pills surged up in her stomach. In her previous life, he had also stood in her yard just like this, wearing that yellowing white shirt, his eyes as clear as if they had never been tainted by the world. The townsfolk had all praised the Sterling family's daughter for having a great eye for people, saying she had picked the most promising one with a single glance. But later on, before her parents' graves were even cold, he had cleared out all the family's money and run far away. Ethan looked up at her, his voice as light as the breeze. Calliope, I'll study hard. I won't let your family down. It was the exact same sentence from her past life. Calliope dug her fingernails deep into her palms, the pain yanking her straight out of the old nightmare. Thinking she was just being shy, her father cleared his throat awkwardly. Don't just look at their faces. Pick someone who is straightforward and honest. Suddenly, a scoff echoed from the doorway. Ethan's mother, Rowena Blackwood, squeezed her way into the yard. Her hair was tightly pinned back with black bobby pins, and she wore a sleazy, flattering smile, but her eyes were glued to the stack of cash on the table. Mr. Sterling, my Ethan doesn't even need to be chosen. Everyone knows he's the valedictorian of the town high school. The teachers all say he's guaranteed to be a college student in the future. She then turned to look at Calliope. If your daughter follows him, it'll bring prestige to her face too. She'll get to share in the glory. It sounded like a compliment, but to the core, she already viewed Calliope as nothing more than a stepping stone. In her past life, it was precisely because of this phrase about sharing the glory that Calliope had been completely blinded. Her father frowned. Who let you in here? Rowena instantly feigned grievance. I was just afraid the kids were too thin-skinned and would miss out on a good opportunity. Ethan lowered his eyes. Mom, stop talking. That long-suffering, enduring demeanor once again made the nosy neighbors eavesdropping at the door gasp in sympathy. Someone whispered, the Sterlings have money, the Blackwoods have brains, they're a perfect match. Someone else chuckled. That Calliope. She has it so easy. She just drops a little money and gets to raise a college boy's son-in-law. Hearing the word son-in-law, Calliope's entire body went ice cold. Right at this moment, the male student who had kept his head bowed the whole time suddenly spoke up. Mister. Sterling, I'm not a good fit. The entire yard paused for a beat. He lifted his head, revealing a handsome but gaunt face and an indifferent gaze. The depths of his eyes held a stubbornness that showed absolutely no desire to please anyone. My family is in debt to the town grocery store, and my little sister still needs to go to school. If you sponsor me, I will pay you back with interest in the future. But I won't be a companion, nor will I sell myself for a favor. Her father frowned. What's your name? Silas Vance. The name sounded as cold and crisp as a winter branch in the early morning frost. Calliope remembered him now. In her past life, she hadn't chosen him. After taking the college entrance exam, he had gone to the city to study at a teacher's college. Later, he gave up a stable, guaranteed job to venture out into the electronics business. 15 years later, he became a renowned industrial magnate in the state. More importantly, in her past life, right before she died, she had heard rumors that a portion of the Sterling family's stolen business funds was eventually clawed back from Ethan by a company called Vance Industries. Afterwards, the money was anonymously donated to the town's elementary school. At that time, she hadn't had the strength left to ask for the details. But now, the opportunity was laid out right in front of her eyes. Rowena Blackwood panicked. Mr. Sterling, his family is dirt poor, and his sickly, fragile younger sister is a bottomless pit of expenses. Silas's face turned deathly pale, his lips pressed tightly into a straight line. Ethan Blackwood finally looked towards Calliope. His eyes held a faint but undeniable certainty. He was absolutely sure that she would choose him, because in her past life, it was for this exact look that she had paid with her entire life. Calliope picked up the stack of cash from the table and walked over to Silas. The breathing of everyone in the yard seemed to stop. Rowena shrieked piercingly. Calliope Sterling, you'd better think carefully. The moment the stack of cash was held out, Ethan's expression changed for the very first time. Calliope looked at Silas, opened her mouth, and said, I choose you. The moment the words left her lips, Rowena lunged forward and slapped Calliope's hand hard, sending the cash scattering everywhere. The money fell all over the ground. The nosy crowd at the gate gasped, pushing and shoving one another to see. Rowena flopped down onto the ground, slapping her thighs and wailing. This is too much. You rich people are trampling all over us poor folks. Thaddeus jumped up. Rowena Blackwood, what the hell are you doing? She pointed at Calliope, tears flowing on command. You Sterlings called my son here, left him standing in the yard for your daughter to pick through like livestock, and now you reject him in front of all these people? Aren't you just stomping all over his dignity? Ethan stood behind her, his face looking awful, but he absolutely did not pull his mother back. In her past life, this was his favorite trick. He would say nothing, letting others wield the knife for him. In the end, he would just gently conclude, my mother was only doing what she thought was best for me. Sure enough, Ethan said softly, Mom, don't make things difficult for Calliope. It was a single sentence that both made him appear understanding and indirectly confirmed that Calliope was indeed the one making things difficult for him. The gossip of the neighbors instantly shifted direction. She's got a point. Calling him over and then not choosing him, where is the Blackwood family supposed to put their faces? The Sterlings have so much money, they look down their noses at everyone. What did you expect? That Vance boy is sly too, snagging such a huge windfall. Silas bent down to pick up the money, but Rowena forcefully stomped on the back of his hand. He frowned in pain, but didn't utter a single groan. Rowena leaned over and spat. Do you even deserve to hold this money? Calliope bent down, grabbed her ankle, and roughly shoved her aside. Rowena hadn't expected Calliope to get physical. She fell flat on the ground and began crying even louder. She's hitting people. The Sterling girl is beating up her elders. Calliope's father's face turned pale with anger. Her mother, Clara Sterling, ran out from the kitchen, her hands still covered in flour. Calliope, what's going on? In her past life, every time Rowena pulled this wailing stunt, Calliope had swallowed her anger. She had always been afraid of putting Ethan in a difficult position. She had always been afraid of hurting his pride, afraid people would say she was using her wealth to bully others. Tolerating it again and again, in the end, everyone thought the Sterling family owed the Blackwood family. This time, Calliope crouched down and picked up the bills one by one. Mrs. Blackwood, your son came here to ask for a sponsorship, not to get engaged. The crying abruptly stopped. Calliope looked up at her. Whom our family spends money on is our business. If you feel you've lost face, you're welcome to take your son home. Ethan's face grew even paler. Calliope, I didn't mean that. Then drag your mother home, she finished. The entire yard was so quiet that only the clucking of chickens could be heard. Ethan's hand twitched slightly, but he still didn't touch Rowena. Rowena reacted and resumed her shrieking. Listen to that. Hear how arrogant these rich folks talk? My son has top grades. If he isn't chosen, it's because this little brat is deliberately humiliating him. Suddenly, a clear female voice rang out from the doorway. Since when does being first in class mean you must be chosen? Should the second and third place students in the high school just stop living then? Everyone turned around. A young woman wearing glasses and hugging a stack of books stood at the gate. Her blue cotton dress was washed to the point of fading, exuding an aura of pure, crisp cleanliness. It was Hazel Brooks, the clerk at the town bookstore, the bright, hidden moonlight in Ethan's heart in her past life. She walked into the yard, placed the stack of books on the table, and nodded to her father very politely. Mr. Sterling, the college entrance exam prep materials you ordered are here. The look in Ethan's eyes softened instantly the moment he looked at her. Calliope's chest stung as if pricked by an old needle, but it quickly turned cold again. Hazel helped Rowena up, speaking in a gentle tone. Mrs. Blackwood, please don't make a scene. Ethan's talents shouldn't be measured by money. It sounded pleasant to the ear, but the blade was pointed straight at Calliope's family. Her father's face darkened. Miss Brooks, our family bought materials. We didn't invite you here to judge who is right or wrong. Hazel's face flushed red. I just couldn't stand watching this. As if finding a pillar of support, Rowena immediately grabbed her hand. Hazel, you tell me what's fair. In what way is my son inferior to that little brat from the Vance family? Hazel looked over at Silas Vance. Her eyes carried pity and a kind of arrogant, condescending compassion. Ethan will apply to the literature department in the future, dedicating himself to writing and academics. As for Silas, his family carries a heavy burden. I'm afraid it will be difficult for him to focus on his studies. Silas's movements to pick up the money paused. Calliope walked over, picked up the last bill from the mud, brushed the dirt off, and shoved it straight into Silas's hand. Whether someone knows how to study depends on their grades, not on whose mouth knows how to recite poetry. Hazel's face stiffened. Ethan finally furrowed his brows. Calliope, you don't need to speak to Hazel like that. He called her so intimately. A few knowing chuckles echoed from the crowd outside the gate. Calliope looked straight at him, enunciating every word. Ethan Blackwood, starting today, my family's money has absolutely nothing to do with you. Not a single cent. Ethan's Adam's apple bobbed. Rowena suddenly sprang up from the ground, raising her hand to grab Calliope's hair. You little brat! How dare you curse my son? A hand blocked the space in front of Calliope. Silas grabbed Rowena's wrist tightly, his voice icy. Touch her again, and I'll call the cops. Rowena was stunned. The next second, Ethan threw a straight punch at Silas's face. The punch missed its target as Silas tilted his head to dodge. Unable to pull back his momentum in time, Ethan knocked over the enamel basin that Clara had just brought out. Hot water splashed all over the ground, steam rising in thick clouds. Calliope's mother let out a terrified scream. Ethan steadied himself, the gentle facade on his face completely shattered. He attacked first. Silas let go of Rowena's wrist. Everyone in the yard had seen exactly what happened, yet the gossiping crowd said nothing. Everyone in this town knew that Ethan Blackwood was an excellent student, the absolute golden boy in the eyes of all the teachers. Silas Vance, on the other hand, came from a poor family. His father had died early, his mother was sickly, and his younger sister suffered from tuberculosis year-round. The innocence of the poor was worth nothing in their eyes. Rowena clutched her wrist and cried even more fiercely. Murder! The Vance brat is using the Sterling family's backing to try and kill me. Ethan supported her, his eyes glaring at Calliope. Calliope, if you have a problem with me, take it out on me. Don't drag my mother into it. The suffocating frustration in her chest almost made her laugh out loud. It was clearly his mother who had acted like a shrew first, and it was he who had thrown the first punch, yet after he twisted the story around, she had somehow become the villain. Her father grabbed his ledger and slammed it hard onto the table. Get out, all of you. Hazel Brooks frowned. Mr. Sterling, there's no need to speak so crudely. Calliope's mother was so furious, her lips trembled. This is our house. Hazel lowered her head, acting as if she had suffered a monstrous grievance. Ethan, let's go. Integrity is more important than money. Hearing this, Rowena grabbed Ethan's hand and prepared to walk straight out, but as she turned her head, she still stared longingly at the stack of materials on the table. Those college entrance exam prep materials were something her father had asked someone to buy in the county city. They couldn't be bought in their small town. In her past life, Calliope had personally gifted them to Ethan. He used those materials to pass the college entrance exam, and later claimed his success was entirely due to his own sleepless nights, trading his very life and sweat for it. This time, Calliope reached out and blocked Hazel's path. Leave the books. Hazel froze. This is what Ethan needs. My family paid for them. She clutched the stack of books tightly against her chest. Calliope, you've already chosen Silas. Why do you have to be so heartless? Calliope looked at those eyes behind the glasses and finally understood where she had lost in her past life. Hazel never fought for anything. She merely stood on the moral high ground, uttered a simple, "Don't do that," and people would willingly deliver things right into her hands. Calliope held out her hand. "My dad has the receipt. Leave the books." Ethan's voice deepened. "Calliope, give me the materials. I'll pay you back." That intimate way of addressing her made her stomach churn. She lifted her eyes. "Call me Miss Sterling? We aren't that close." He stiffened. Suddenly, the voice of Mr. Harrison, their homeroom teacher, rang out from the doorway. "What's all this commotion?" The crowd parted. Mr. Harrison walked in carrying an old leather briefcase. Seeing Ethan, he immediately frowned. "The college entrance exam is just around the corner, and you're wasting time here?" Rowena immediately threw herself toward him. "Mr. Harrison, you have to give us justice. The Sterlings are using their money to humiliate my son." Mr. Harrison glanced at the stack of cash on the table, then looked at Calliope and Silas. His face darkened. "Mr. Sterling, sponsoring students is a good deed, but you can't go about it as if you're buying a person." As soon as the words were spoken, her father's anger was instantly squashed. His biggest fear in life was people saying his money was dirty, or calling him a heartless, uncultured nouveau riche. Calliope's mother hurriedly explained, "Mr. Harrison, it's not like that at all." Mr. Harrison waved his hand dismissively. "Ethan's grades are the most consistent. Even the county officials are keeping an eye on him. Let him use the materials first. We'll talk about everything else later." The hand Silas was using to tightly grip the stack of cash slowly clenched into a fist. Calliope knew this was what hurt the most. It wasn't about being poor, nor was it about being cursed at. It was that everyone automatically assumed the best things naturally had to be reserved for the one who shined the brightest. In her past life, she had thought the same way. But this time, she wouldn't yield. She snatched the receipt from her father's hand and slapped it hard onto the table. "Mr. Harrison, school teaches us to return lost items to their owners. It also teaches us that whoever pays for something owns it." Mr. Harrison's expression changed. "Calliope Sterling, is that how you speak to a teacher?" Hazel said softly, "Let it go, Ethan. We won't take them." She set the books down, the rims of her eyes turning red again. Ethan looked at her as if a knife were cutting into his own flesh. Before turning away, he suddenly glared at Silas. "Relying on other people's charity won't last long." Before Silas could even say a word, Rowena Blackwood had already dashed to the yard's gate, screaming at the crowd. "Did you all hear that? The Sterlings would rather give their money to a little brat dragging a mountain of debt than to the top student in the school. When their daughter tries to find a husband later on, they shouldn't blame people for being picky." Bursts of mocking laughter and gossip erupted all at once. Calliope's father, furious, grabbed a carrying pole and chased after her. Rowena ran and shrieked, "Thaddeus Sterling is hitting people." The very next second, she crashed into a bicycle coming from the end of the alley. A black leather briefcase hanging from the handlebars smacked onto the ground. The cyclist was the accountant of the town supply depot, Vernon Shaw. The briefcase popped open, and a stack of inventory invoices scattered across the dirt. Her father stopped in his tracks at the gate. Vernon frantically squatted down to pick them up, his forehead breaking out in a cold sweat. Calliope, sharp-eyed, caught a glimpse of one of the invoices. It read, "Digital watches, 200 units." The receiver wasn't her father. It was Arthur Blackwood, Ethan's father, who had died many years ago. Calliope's heart skipped a beat. In her past life, right before her family's business funds were swept away, a batch of digital watches that didn't match their ledgers had also appeared. At the time, her father thought an employee had simply misremembered, so he hadn't looked into it. Later on, Ethan had cleaned out all the funds so smoothly and seamlessly that it felt as if someone had been tampering with their family's books long beforehand. Vernon hastily stuffed the invoices back into his briefcase. When he looked up and met Calliope's gaze, his face turned even uglier. "Mr. Sterling, I have matters to attend to." He pushed his bike, intending to walk straight off. Her father called out, stopping him. "Old Vernon, why do you have an invoice for digital watches in your briefcase?" Vernon gave a stiff smile. "The supply depot restocks inventory too. What's so strange about that?" Rowena clutched her waist as she clumsily scrambled up from the ground, her eyes darting around defensively. "Mr. Sterling, don't just go around biting anyone in sight. I got hit and I haven't even made you pay for damages yet." Ethan's face was gloomy. "Mom, let's go." Hazel Brooks supported Rowena, looking back at Calliope as they walked away. That look seemed to say Calliope was just making trouble out of nothing. "Mr. Harrison sighed. "Calliope, focus your mind on your studies. Don't take after your father, filling your head with nothing but business and trading." The remark was both vicious and precise. Her father's face instantly turned ashen. For years, as he traveled back and forth trading goods from the south, people had called him a profiteer, a mere peddler. It had been incredibly difficult until the new policies loosened up. Now that the family had money, people still looked down on him. Calliope looked at her teacher. "Mr. Harrison, earlier you said Ethan's college entrance exam is coming up and he can't be delayed. Silas is taking the exam soon too. Why didn't you ask him about it?" Mr. Harrison was rendered speechless. Silas suddenly placed the stack of cash back onto the table. "Mr. Sterling, let's discuss the sponsorship another day." Calliope snapped her head around to look at him. The corner of his eye was bruised purple. Although Ethan's punch earlier had been a glancing blow, it had still connected. "With all the commotion today, if I take this money, I'll only bring more trouble to your family," Silas added quietly. Those words felt like a needle piercing Calliope's hand, leaving a lingering numbness. She hadn't chosen him just to have him suffer humiliation in her place. Her father remained silent for a long moment before pushing the stack of cash back across the table. "I, Thaddeus Sterling, value reason and fairness above all else in my dealings. You are willing to go to school, and I am willing to put up the money. You just take this." Another sneer came from the gate. "Mr. Sterling is so generous, throwing money around to buy a reputation." It was Vernon Shaw again. He hadn't gone far, leaning against his bicycle with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Suppressing his anger, her father asked, "Old Vernon, what do you mean?" Vernon blew a smoke ring. "Nothing. I just wanted to remind you that the county is cracking down hard on smuggled goods lately. For things like digital watches coming from the south, having unclear invoices is going to be a lot of trouble." The entire yard fell dead silent. In 1990, the two words traders feared the most were exactly those: smuggled goods. Thaddeus had invoices for all his goods, but in the business of buying and reselling through multiple middlemen, if subjected to a strict inspection, no one would dare beat their chest and guarantee everything was flawless. Rowena Blackwood, hiding behind the crowd, suddenly grew emboldened. "No wonder they have so much money. Turns out they're walking a crooked path." Clara's face turned pale. "You're lying," Vernon Shaw chuckled. "Whether it's clear or not, we'll know once the Commerce Department gets here." As soon as the words left his mouth, two bicycles indeed appeared at the end of the alley. The man leading the way wore a blue uniform, his bicycle bell ringing urgently. Thaddeus's hand pressed tightly against his ledger, his knuckles turning stark white. In Calliope's past life, the Commerce Department had also come once. They had only found a few invoices that didn't meet regulations and issued a small fine. But after that incident, her father had fallen gravely ill, hovering on the brink of death. Ethan Blackwood had taken advantage of Calliope's panic, coming over every day to help organize the ledgers. It was only later she realized that from that very moment, he had gained a clear grasp of every single one of her family's financial transactions. It turned out this path of ruin had begun precisely on this day. The men in blue uniforms stopped their bikes in front of the yard. The man in the lead pulled out his work badge. "You are Thaddeus Sterling, correct? Someone reported that your family is dealing in digital watches of unknown origin." Rowena immediately ducked behind Hazel Brooks, but her face clearly revealed a gloating expression. Thaddeus clutched the ledger tightly against his chest. "All my goods have invoices." The officer held out his hand. "Let's have a look then." Calliope was just about to turn and head inside when Vernon Shaw suddenly bumped into her. The cigarette ash from his hand fell right next to the doorway. A spark licked the cardboard box containing her father's old invoices. By the time Calliope smelled the burning scent, the flames had already flared up. The cardboard box burned extremely fast. Her mother rushed over with a basin of water but slipped and fell, the enamel basin crashing loudly onto the ground. Silas Vance reacted the fastest. He grabbed a wet burlap sack from the corner of the wall and slammed it forcefully onto the flames. By the time the fire was put out, the edges of the invoices were already charred black. The Commerce Department officer's face darkened even further. "What is the meaning of this? We just arrived and you start burning invoices?" Thaddeus roared. "Vernon Shaw, it was your cigarette ash that dropped." Vernon threw both hands up in the air. "Mr. Sterling, you can be careless with what you eat, but you can't be careless with your words." I was several steps away from the door. Everyone saw it. The crowd outside the door actively avoided eye contact. The nosy folks who had been crowding around with the most enthusiasm moments ago suddenly acted as if they had all gone completely blind. Rowena muttered, burning the evidence because of a guilty conscience, then blaming it on someone else. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was just enough for everyone to hear. Clara furiously charged forward. "Rowena Blackwood, say that one more time, I dare you." Rowena flopped down onto the ground. Go ahead and hit me. Your family has money and power anyway. Just beat this poor widow to death. The commerce officer frowned. Enough of this noise. Thaddeus Sterling, bring all your ledgers and invoices back to the department for inspection. The blood drained from Thaddeus's face. That ledger didn't just record incoming inventory. It also contained all the IOUs for goods sold on credit. Once it was taken away, all the people in this town who owed her family money would immediately play dead and refuse to acknowledge their debts. It had been the exact same in her past life. A single inspection had shattered all of her father's capital. Ethan stepped forward, his voice gentle. Mr. Sterling, my handwriting is clear, and I'm good at calculations. I can help you tally up the ledgers one more time. Hazel also nodded along. Ethan sincerely wants to help, Mr. Sterling. Please don't let the little misunderstanding from earlier delay official business. This trap was far too familiar. Stomp her family into the mud, and only then reach out a hand. Thaddeus was clearly wavering. He had always respected educated people, and he was even more terrified that his own carelessness would ruin his entire family. Ethan looked at Calliope, his eyes restoring the same unhurried, confident composure he had possessed in her past life, looking as if he were saying, "In the end, you still have to beg me." Silas Vance suddenly spoke up. "Mr. Sterling, I know how to do bookkeeping too." Rowena Blackwood sneered. "Your family can't even afford an abacus bead? What could you possibly know how to calculate?" Silas didn't even bother looking at her. The IOUs at the grocery store, the receipts for medicine bought on credit, the school tuition fees family records, every single penny. My mother was bedridden for 3 years, and I never miscalculated a single cent. His voice wasn't loud, but his words made the entire yard fall silent. The Commerce Department officer urged, "It doesn't matter who helps, just bring the things out here first." Calliope rushed into the main room and pulled out a tin box hidden at the bottom of the wardrobe. In her past life, she hadn't known that her family's invoices were kept in 2 places. The old invoices in a cardboard box, and the new ones stored in this tin box. Her father had always told her never to put all her eggs in one basket. But later on, Ethan had sweet-talked her into handing everything over. He had even taken this tin box. Opening the lid, inside were neatly pressed red invoices, receipts, and railway shipping slips. When her father saw the tin box, his eyes reddened. "Calliope, how did you know?" She could only reply, "You mentioned it before, Dad." The Commerce Department officer flipped through them, his expression softening a bit. But Vernon Shaw suddenly pointed at one of the invoices. "There's a problem with this one. It says 300 digital watches were sent from the south, but the town's ledger only records 180. Where did the remaining 120 go?" Thaddeus snatched the paper back. "That's impossible, but the invoice indeed stated 300 units. Calliope remembered this batch of goods from her past life. The missing 120 watches were later displayed at the supply depot's counter, priced cheaper than her family's. At the time, her father thought his southern supplier had simultaneously provided goods to someone else and was furious for days. Now it seemed their ledgers had been tampered with right from the source. The commerce officer pulled the invoice out. "We have to take this one back." Thaddeus grew anxious, his voice hoarse. "Officer, the handwriting on this invoice isn't mine." Vernon gave a cold snort. "Do you have to write an import invoice yourself? Mr. Sterling, are you joking?" Silas stared intently at the invoice. "The top part of this paper doesn't match the others." Everyone looked at him. He pointed to the corner of the paper. "The other shipping slips all have the bright red stamp of the county transport station, but the stamp on this one is dull and dark. The placement is off, too." The commerce officer picked it up to examine it closely. Vernon's face instantly changed. "What does a kid know?" Vernon snapped. Silas was about to continue, but Ethan interrupted him. "The shade of the ink doesn't prove anything. The transport station changes their ink pads all the time." Mr. Harrison nodded in agreement. "Ethan is right. Don't let a student interject nonsense." Calliope's heart turned ice cold. Ethan obviously knew. In her past life, he had also used the excuse of helping to organize the ledgers to find loopholes, gradually seizing all her family's business funds step by step. The commerce officer closed the lid of the tin box. "We are temporarily sealing this. Tomorrow, Thaddeus Sterling will report to the department to explain." Thaddeus tried to stop them, but Clara gripped his sleeve tightly, holding him back. Standing outside the door, Rowena grinned obnoxiously. "Calliope, now do you see who can actually help your family?" Ethan looked at her quietly. "If you need me, I can stay tonight." Hazel Brooks's face went pale, but she forced herself to maintain her gentle demeanor. "Ethan, helping people is what's most important." Calliope didn't even bother looking at them. She turned her back and began picking up the half-burnt invoices from the ground. Amidst the black ash, a half-unburnt blue word stuck out. Written on it was a name, Arthur Blackwood. Just as she reached out to pick it up, A black cloth shoe stomped hard onto that half piece of paper. The sole of the shoe ground into it a few times. The smile on Rowena's face stiffened, as if smeared with glue. Picking up torn paper now? The Sterlings sure know how to be frugal. Calliope looked up at her. Move your foot. Rowena's eyes darted away evasively, but she kept a stubborn front. What if I don't want to? Silas Vance bent down, grabbed her ankle, and shoved it aside. His movement wasn't violent, but it was decisive. Rowena Blackwood staggered and immediately shrieked. He's hitting me again. Did everyone see that? This time, however, no one chimed in to support her right away, because that torn half of the paper had been exposed. The Commerce Department officer also saw the name. Who is Arthur Blackwood? The entire yard fell frighteningly silent. For the first time, all the color drained from Ethan Blackwood's face. Rowena lunged forward to snatch it. My husband has been dead for years. Who knows what wicked person wrote his name down? Calliope picked up the scrap of paper and handed it to the commerce officer. Officer, this paper and the problematic invoice from earlier are probably part of the same set. Vernon Shaw's cigarette dropped to the ground. He bent down to pick it up, his hands visibly trembling. The commerce officer looked at him. Accountant Shaw, do you know Arthur Blackwood? Vernon forced a smile that looked worse than crying. We're in the same town. Who wouldn't know him? Rowena hastily interrupted. My husband passed away 7 years ago. Don't sling mud at a dead man. 7 years, but the date on this invoice is from last month. Someone in the crowd sharply sucked in a breath of cold air. Ethan finally spoke up. It might just be someone with the same name. Calliope looked at him. Is there a second Arthur Blackwood in this town? His lips pressed tightly together. Hazel Brooke stepped in front of him. Calliope, you can't just drag his deceased father out to make a mockery of him just because you didn't choose Ethan. Those words were truly venomous. She twisted a serious issue about forged invoices into a petty tale of a woman scorned. In her past life, Hazel had been exactly the same. She never used vulgar language, yet every single word she spoke pinned Calliope to the pillar of shame. Thaddeus couldn't hold back any longer. Miss Brooks, stop making baseless accusations against my daughter. Hazel's eyes grew red. I'm only speaking out of fairness. The commerce officer put the torn invoice away. Quiet down, all of you. Vernon Shaw, Rowena Blackwood, both of you will report to the department tomorrow for questioning. Rowena's legs gave out. Ethan caught her, the blue veins bulging prominently on the back of his hands. Officer, my mother is illiterate. There has to be a misunderstanding here. The commerce officer replied coldly. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, we'll know once the investigation is complete. Vernon tried to push his bicycle and slip away, but another officer blocked his path. Bring that leather briefcase along for inspection, too. Upon hearing that, his face turned absolutely ashen. Yet, Calliope still didn't feel satisfied. She knew this was far from enough. 120 digital watches was no small number. If Vernon Shaw dared to use Arthur Blackwood's name to move goods, Rowena had definitely received a cut of the profits. As for whether Ethan knew about it or not, the Ethan of her past life had been far too good at playing the innocent saint. The crowd dispersed, leaving the yard in a messy state of disarray. Clara crouched down to pick up the shattered pieces of the enamel basin, accidentally cutting her finger and making it bleed. Thaddeus stood by the doorway, his back seemingly hunched with sudden age. Silas placed the stack of cash back onto the table. Mr. Sterling, I cannot accept this today. Calliope panicked. Why not? He looked at her, his voice very gentle. If I take it now, people will say I'm just taking advantage of your family's misfortune. Those words made Calliope's heart ache with a bitter pang. Suddenly, Thaddeus split the stack of cash in two. He pushed one half towards Silas and pressed the other half under his ledger. Then write an IOU. This tuition money is a loan from me. You can pay it back slowly after you get into college. You'll come help me organize the ledgers, and I'll pay you a daily wage. Silas was stunned. This arrangement preserved his dignity far better than a simple, one-sided sponsorship ever could. Her father was not a foolish man. It was just that in her previous life, he had been dragged down into the mud by her own stubbornness. Silas took a pen and paper and wrote out the IOU. His handwriting was slender, but the strokes were firm and resolute. Silas Vance borrows $300 from Thaddeus Sterling for tuition fees. Interest will be calculated according to bank rates. Upon university admission, the debt will be paid back in gradual installments. Thaddeus looked at it for a long time, then nodded. Come by tomorrow morning. Outside the door, Ethan's voice rang out once again. Mr. Sterling, I'd like to speak with Calliope privately for a moment. Clara's expression darkened. There's nothing for you to say. Ethan stood outside the doorway. Behind him, the sky was growing dark. It's about the invoice with my father's name on it. This sentence made everyone in the house freeze. Calliope stepped out to the door. Speak, she said. He glanced at Silas. I can only tell you privately. Silas neatly folded his IOU and stepped outside. As he brushed past Ethan, their shoulders lightly bumped. Ethan whispered, "Don't think she actually cares about you." Silas stopped and tilted his head to look at him. "At least I don't let my mother steal her family's money." Ethan's face suddenly turned icy. He raised his hand and shoved Silas hard in the chest. Silas's back slammed against the doorframe, the wooden door letting out a dull, heavy thud. Calliope's mother cried out and hurried over to support him. Ethan, as if just realizing what he had done, pulled his hand back. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." Silas clutched his shoulder and didn't reply. That silence, that sheer lack of interest in arguing back, humiliated Ethan more than any curse words ever could. Calliope stepped in front of Silas, shielding him. "If you want to talk about the invoice, then talk. If not, get out." Ethan looked at her, an unfamiliar anger surging in the depths of his eyes. In her past life, Calliope had never spoken a harsh word to him. She had always carefully flattered him. Whenever he frowned, she would self-reflect, wondering if she reeked of a peddler's money again. Now that she was telling him to get out, he looked as if someone had just snatched his ancestral tablet right off the altar. "Calliope, the invoice matter has nothing to do with me." He lowered his voice extremely softly. "But when my father was alive, he did indeed run Southern Goods for the supply depot. It's possible someone forged his name and used his old stamp." Calliope stared hard at him. "Who?" "I don't know." "If you don't know, then why are you here?" His Adam's apple bobbed. "I can help you investigate." Hazel Brooks, who had chased after him from the end of the alley, heard this. Her face instantly changed. "Ethan, are you crazy? They just humiliated you like that." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. "Hazel, this is serious business." Hazel bit her lip and looked at Calliope. "Calliope, are you satisfied now? You chose someone else, yet you force Ethan to clean up your mess." Calliope replied coldly, "No one asked him to." Hazel choked on her words, the rims of her eyes turning red. Ethan suddenly said, "Calliope, you weren't like this before." Calliope almost burst out laughing. How was she before? Buying him a voice recorder, paying off his mother's gambling debts, giving money for Hazel's book cafe, only to finally be kicked into a coffin by his entire family? The night wind blew past. Calliope pointed her finger toward the yard gate. "Well, this is how I am now." Ethan's face turned livid. Hazel supported his arm. "Let's go. Don't beg her." "Beg?" It was obvious that he had hauled himself to her house on his own accord. Outside the door, a few more people had gathered. Rumors in this town ran faster than dogs. An auntie deliberately raised her voice. "The Sterling girl is something else. Picks one during the day and keeps another at night." Clara was so angry she was trembling. Thaddeus grabbed a broom and charged outside. "Try talking nonsense again, I dare you." The auntie curled her lips and ran off. Dares to do it, but is afraid of people talking. Ethan didn't offer a single word of explanation to defend Calliope. Neither did Hazel. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the end of the alley, looking exactly like a beautiful painting praised by everyone. Meanwhile, Calliope stood in the middle of her ruined yard, looking like the vulgar, uncultured witch in their story. Suddenly, Silas picked up a broken piece of roof tile from the ground and knocked it sharply against the doorframe. The crisp sound made everyone turn to look at him. He turned to the neighbors who hadn't gone far. "I will write a detailed report of everything that happened in the Sterling family's yard today and submit it to the police station tomorrow to be put on record. Whoever dares to weave lies and talk nonsense about Calliope Sterling again, I will add their name right onto it." No one expected him to do that. The people in the town weren't afraid of arguments, but they were terrified of things written in black and white. That auntie quickened her pace, and the murmurs and cursing completely died down. Calliope looked at Silas's profile, her throat slightly choked. In her past life, she had spent so much money just to get Ethan to look her way, yet he had remained silent when rumors drove her to her death. Silas Vance hadn't received a single penny, yet he was the one who shielded Calliope from the verbal abuse that night. He and Thaddeus sorted through the ledgers in the main room, a kerosene lamp casting their flickering shadows on the wall. Calliope took the half-burnt invoices and arranged them by date, discovering that every problematic invoice coincided exactly with the days the supply depot had restocked its inventory. The more Thaddeus looked, the more horrified he became. "No wonder I kept feeling like we were short on goods." Silas used a pencil to circle 3 dates. "On these 3 days, Vernon Shaw came to your house, Mr. Sterling." Clara thought for a moment. "He did come. He said he was coming over to help your father check the market prices." Suddenly, a faint noise came from outside the window. Silas sprang up and pushed the window wide open. A dark shadow darted along the base of the wall, clutching half a ledger tightly in its hand. "Catch the thief!" Thaddeus shouted. Silas vaulted through the window and chased after him. At the end of the alley, a bicycle bell rang urgently. The dark figure pedaled away furiously. Silas chased him to the head of the alley, but was blocked by a cargo tricycle lying horizontally across the road. By the time Calliope and her father caught up, they only saw a piece of gray fabric left on the ground. It was the fabric of the town high school's uniform pants. Thaddeus panted heavily. Which ledger did we lose? Clara rummaged through the room for a while, her face turning chalky white. The IOU ledger is gone. Losing the IOU ledger was even more lethal than losing the inventory invoices. It clearly recorded who owed their family how much money and when it was due. Without it, those people would turn their backs and deny their debts, and the family's cash flow would be immediately severed. Silas picked up the gray fabric and rubbed it between his fingertips. This isn't a fresh tear. The edges have chalk dust on them. A high school student, Ethan Blackwood. The name almost slipped out of Calliope's mouth, but there wasn't enough evidence. Thaddeus couldn't hold back anymore. I'm going to the Blackwoods. Silas stopped him. If you go now, they won't admit it. They'll just make a scene and claim the Sterlings are using their wealth to bully people. Thaddeus punched the wall hard. Then what should we do? Silas looked at Calliope. Aren't you going to the Commerce Department tomorrow? Mr. Sterling, just tidy up the remaining ledgers. Let's secure the current batch of goods first. Calliope nodded. They stayed up the entire night. As soon as morning broke, Silas went to the school to request a leave of absence, taking the opportunity to poke around and see who had been absent from the dorms last night. Calliope and her parents went to the Commerce Department. Vernon Shaw was already there. Rowena Blackwood was sitting by the door, and as soon as she saw them, she started wailing. Mr. Sterling, I couldn't sleep a wink all night. My Arthur is dead, yet you people still drag his name out to gossip about. Doesn't your conscience hurt? Thaddeus kept a cold expression. Whether it hurts or not, we'll know after the investigation. Director Lowe of the department flipped through the stack of invoices, his eyebrows furrowing tighter and tighter. Thaddeus Sterling, 120 units from this batch of digital watches are unaccounted for. Thaddeus handed over the neatly organized inventory summary. That's a forged invoice. My actual receipt was 180 units. The railway shipping weight matches up. Director Lowe looked at the weight slip, his face relaxing slightly. Vernon Shaw immediately chimed in. The weight can be forged too. Calliope tilted her head and looked at him. It has the transport station's stamp. If you want to check if it's forged, you have to go up to the county. Accountant Shaw, you seem so familiar with this. Have you gone to check it yourself before? Vernon Shaw was rendered speechless. Rowena started crying again. You sharp-tongued little brat. Who would ever want to marry you in the future? Director Lowe tapped the desk. Order. Just then, Ethan Blackwood walked in. He wore that yellowing white shirt, holding a workbook in his hand. Director Lowe, I can prove my mother knew nothing about this. Rowena looked at him, as if he were her savior. Ethan placed the workbook on the desk. This is an ink impression of the name stamp my father left behind before he died. When I was little, I used to stamp it in my books for fun. The physical stamp was burned by my mother along with Joss paper 7 years ago. It's impossible for it to have appeared last month. Director Lowe opened the workbook. Inside, there were indeed a few red stamps. Calliope's heart sank. He didn't come to help them. He came to cut off the trail. As long as he could prove the stamp no longer existed, the name Arthur Blackwood on that invoice would be chalked up to an imposter. Rowena Blackwood would know nothing. The Blackwood family would remain innocent, and Vernon Shaw could simply push the blame onto some unknown forger. Hazel Brooks stood outside the door, her eyes full of distress. Ethan stayed up all night looking for this. The way the people around them looked at Ethan immediately changed. An excellent student, a filial son clearing his deceased father's name, a beautiful reputation. Ethan looked at Calliope. Calliope, I told you I would investigate. Calliope clutched the bag in her hand tightly. Director Lowe held the ink impression and compared it to the half-burnt invoice. They didn't look completely identical. Rowena's crying instantly grew louder. I told you, our family was framed. Vernon Shaw wiped his sweat. Director Lowe, since the Arthur Blackwood lead is a dead end, shouldn't we continue inspecting the Sterling family's goods? Her father's face turned ashen. Calliope pulled another piece of paper from her bag. Director Lowe, could you take a look at this too? Ethan's gaze froze. It was the public price list of the supply depot that Silas Vance had copied down by date the night before. Every time her family lost goods, 2 days later, the supply depot would have the exact same new model of digital watches, priced $3 cheaper. After looking it over, Director Lowe raised his head and asked Vernon Shaw, where did the supply depot import these batches of goods from? Vernon forced a smile. Proper, official channels. Where are the invoices? At the depot. Director Lowe stood up abruptly. Let's go to the supply depot. Vernon's legs visibly gave out. Rowena's crying hitched in her throat. Ethan suddenly spoke up again. Director Lowe, the college entrance exam is coming up, and my mother is in poor health. If the stamp has proven that the Blackwood family isn't involved, can my mother go home first? Director Lowe thought for a moment, then waved his hand. Go home first, but you must be present whenever called. Rowena immediately scrambled to her feet. As she walked past Calliope, she whispered at a volume only Calliope could hear. You damn brat, you can guess for yourself whose hands the ledger is in. Calliope grabbed her arm tightly. What did you say? Rowena fell backward, her forehead slamming hard against the doorframe. Fresh blood instantly began to pour down. She shrieked at the top of her lungs. Calliope Sterling is murdering someone. Blood streamed down Rowena's forehead. In the blink of an eye, the entrance to the Commerce Department was swarming with people. Ethan rushed over and shoved Calliope hard. Calliope Sterling! Calliope stumbled backward 2 steps, crashing into the corner of a desk. A sharp pain shot through her hip, gradually turning numb. Her father caught her, his eyes red with anger. Why did you push my daughter? Ethan held Rowena, his voice trembling. She pushed my mother and made her bleed. Everyone saw it. Saw what? They saw Calliope grab her arm, but they didn't see Rowena throw her own head against the doorframe. Rowena clutched her forehead, weeping as if her heart was being ripped apart. I know the Sterling family has money, and I can't afford to offend them, but I'm just a widow. Is there any justice left when I'm being bullied like this? Hazel Brooks squeezed through the crowd, pulled out a handkerchief, and dabbed at the blood for her. Don't be afraid, Mrs. Blackwood. I'll take you to the hospital. She looked up at Calliope, her eyes full of disappointment, as if Calliope really were a murderer. Calliope, you've gone way too far. Calliope only said one thing. The doorframe can't run. How she crashed into it, the people standing outside saw clearly. No one in the crowd responded. Some lowered their heads, others turned their faces away. The people in this town were best at eavesdropping and gossiping, and also best at playing deaf and dumb at crucial moments. Director Lowe's face looked awful. Take her to the hospital first. We'll deal with the injury later. Rowena was helped onto the back seat of a bicycle. As she left, she didn't forget to scream back, I'm going to sue her. Thaddeus clenched his fists and was about to chase after her, but Calliope pulled him back. Let's go to the supply depot first. But you're being framed. Her hip throbbed with pain, but she gritted her teeth and said, the ledgers are more important than this grievance of mine. Saying those words left a bitter taste in her own mouth. In her past life, time and time again, she had put aside her family's proper business for Ethan Blackwood. In the end, her family was ruined, and she had lost her life. This time, she absolutely could not make the same mistake. Inside the supply depot's warehouse, Director Lowe led his men to inspect the ledgers. Behind the display counters lay several rows of digital watches, the exact same style that Thaddeus imported from the South. Vernon Shaw couldn't name the person who had brought the goods in. He could only dig up a few vague receipts. The supplier listed on the receipts was named Blackwood Commerce. The name Arthur Blackwood had appeared again under a different guise. Director Lowe's face turned completely grim. Vernon Shaw, explain yourself. Sweat poured down Vernon's face like rain. These are goods brought in by someone else. I'm only responsible for entering them into the ledger. Who brought them in? I don't remember. Calliope sneered. Over 100 watches, thousands of dollars, and you don't remember? He glared at her. Young lady, don't interrupt. Footsteps echoed outside the warehouse door. Silas Vance had arrived, holding a dormitory sign-in sheet in his hand. He saw Calliope, clutching her hip, and his eyebrows immediately furrowed. What's wrong? She shook her head. Tell us what you found first. He handed the sign-in sheet to Director Lowe. Last night, after the evening study hall for the senior boys at the town high school, Ethan Blackwood asked for permission to leave. His excuse was that his mother was sick. When he returned to the school, the leg of his pants was torn. The dorm supervisor made a note of it. Calliope's heart skipped a beat. Director Lowe took the paper. How did you get this? I'm the class president, Silas replied. The dorm supervisor asked me to fill in the supplementary registrations. He then pulled out the gray piece of fabric. This fabric matches exactly with the fabric left behind by the thief who stole the ledger last night. Vernon Shaw suddenly sneered. This only proves Ethan left his house last night. It doesn't prove he stole the ledger. He was right. They were still missing the most crucial link. Ethan had an alibi. He was currently taking Rowena to the hospital. As long as the ledger wasn't found, he could still wash his hands of the crime. Director Lowe sent his men to the Blackwood house to search for the ledger. Half an hour later, the staff returned and shook their heads. Not there. Rowena, her head wrapped in gauze, had also returned. As soon as she saw Calliope, she shrank back and hid behind Ethan. Don't let her come near me. Ethan looked at Calliope, his eyes chilling to the bone. Calliope, haven't you caused enough trouble? Silas stepped forward. You stole the Sterling family's IOU ledger last night. Ethan laughed. Where's the proof? That laugh made Calliope feel as if she were back in front of the book cafe in the city in her past life. He had laughed and looked at her just like that, letting his mother curse her for being impure. The crowd of onlookers grew larger. Mr. Harrison had also arrived and, hearing a few sentences, looked very displeased. Silas Vance, return to school immediately. The college entrance exam is coming up, and you're making a scene here. Do you still want to take the exam? Silas didn't move. Mr. Harrison grew angry. You're a student receiving a sponsorship. Sticking your nose into the Sterling family's business disputes, are you trying to fish for some benefits? Those words were more vicious than a slap. Silas's face turned deathly pale. Calliope was just about to speak up when Ethan suddenly pulled a ledger from his school bag. Is this what everyone is looking for? The ledger was completely intact. The cover was wrapped in brown craft paper, wrapped by her father's own hands. Ethan placed it on the table, his tone calm. I picked this up at the end of the alley last night. I was planning to return it to Mr. Sterling today. I didn't expect everyone to throw dirty water on me first. Rowena immediately slapped her thigh and wailed. Oh, my son, your good intentions are being treated like thievery. Hazel's eyes grew red again. Ethan, you are just too kind. Mr. Harrison looked at Silas as if he were looking at a pile of muck. Do you have anything else to say for yourself now? Silas stared intently at the ledger. If you found it, why didn't you return it immediately? Ethan's voice was flat. My mother was injured. I had to take her to the hospital. He spoke with such steady composure, so steady that anyone who heard him would want to believe him. Thaddeus reached out to take the ledger, but Ethan pressed his hand down on it. Mr. Sterling, before I return this to you, I'd like to ask Director Lowe to serve as a witness. Calliope's heart skipped a beat. Ethan flipped the ledger open and pointed to a few pages. There are a lot of erasures and alterations here. The debtors and the amounts don't match up. Is the Sterling family deliberately keeping fake books, using the inspection as an excuse to extort people in town? Thaddeus froze in anger. You're lying. Calliope rushed over to look. Those few pages had indeed been altered. Debts that were originally just over $10 had been changed to hundreds of dollars. Debts that had been fully paid off were crossed out and marked as unpaid. At first glance, the handwriting looked like Thaddeus's, but upon closer inspection, the strokes were much more elegant and fluid. Ethan looked at Calliope. Calliope, I know you don't like me, but you need to have a conscience when doing business. The crowd erupted in an uproar. Just moments ago, the inspection was focused on the supply depot, but now he had skillfully steered the wind to point straight at the Sterling family. Vernon Shaw suddenly seemed to come back to life. Director Lowe, the Sterlings don't even have their own ledgers straight. On what grounds do they claim the goods in my depot have problems? A few people who owed the Sterling family money also poked their heads out from the crowd. That's right, I clearly paid mine off in full. Why does the ledger still say I owe money? Mr. Sterling, you might have money, but you can't just bully honest folks like this. Thaddeus grew so anxious, his face turned beet red. I didn't write this. But the more frantic he became, the more he looked like a guilty man. Rowena clutched her forehead and sneered. I knew it. The money they make isn't clean at all. Their hearts are black. Clara gripped the edge of the table tightly, her lips turning frighteningly pale. Silas picked up the ledger and flipped to the last few pages. The ink on these pages is newer. Ethan retorted. So you're an expert on ink now, too? Just a little. Silas looked at him. Then tell us, who altered it? Silas fell silent. Without proof, pointing the finger at anyone would just seem like biting blindly. Mr. Harrison shouted, Enough! You're seniors, yet instead of focusing on the right path, you're all joining the adults in causing trouble. Director Lowe put the ledger away. The ledgers will also have to be taken back for examination and cross-referencing. Thaddeus staggered, almost falling. If this ledger was concluded to be forged, the Sterling family's reputation would be ruined. The debts wouldn't be collected, and there would be no way to continue investigating the goods at the supply depot. Ethan's move was even more vicious than merely stealing the ledger. He didn't just want to destroy a book, he wanted to sever Thaddeus's business path by its very roots. Calliope looked at him. For the first time, she clearly and distinctly realized that the man who had swept away all of her family's money in her past life wasn't merely aloof and cold. He was cunning, vindictive, and deeply venomous. Ethan walked up to Calliope and lowered his voice. It's not too late for you to regret this. Calliope looked up. His voice dropped even lower. Tell Silas to butt out. I can explain things for Mr. Sterling. I'll say the ledger was altered by an outsider when it was dropped. Calliope stared straight into his eyes. What are your conditions? He paused for a beat. Give me the exam prep materials, give me the sponsorship spot, and what happened today ends here. It was absolutely ridiculous. After going through such a huge, elaborate scheme, his ultimate goal was still to gather the Sterling family's money and resources into his own hands. Hazel Brooks stood in the distance. Her gaze was complicated, but she made no move to stop him. Perhaps in her eyes, Ethan taking the Sterling family's money was an honor for the Sterling family. Before Calliope could even open her mouth, Silas Vance suddenly spoke up. This ledger cannot be taken away. Director Lowe frowned. Are you trying to obstruct an officer on duty? Silas shook his head. No, I want to examine the handwriting right here. Mr. Harrison laughed out of sheer anger. Silas Vance, who do you think you are? Suddenly, an old voice rang out from outside the warehouse door. He is my student. Everyone turned their heads. The former principal of the town high school, Principal Winston, stood outside the door, leaning on a cane, clutching an old envelope in his hand. Silas stepped forward to support him. Principal Winston looked at Director Lowe. I taught literature for 40 years, and I've also taught calligraphy. I can certainly tell whether Thaddeus Sterling wrote this or not. The calm composure on Ethan Blackwood's face finally cracked. Principal Winston sat down at the table. He pushed his reading glasses up his nose and pressed his finger against the ledger page. Everyone fell dead silent. The old principal commanded great respect in the town. Half of Ethan's certificates of merit had been signed by him. Principal Winston first examined Thaddeus's everyday handwriting in the ledger. Thaddeus Sterling's handwriting. His horizontal strokes are short, his vertical strokes are heavy, and he finishes his strokes hastily, like a man carrying a heavy load on a carrying pole, with strength in his hands. He then looked at the altered pages. In these spots, the horizontal strokes are elongated, while the sweeping strokes are light. This is the hand of someone who frequently writes literature. Ethan's face turned chalky white. Mr. Harrison immediately came to his defense. There are many people who know how to write well. You can't just say it's Ethan. Principal Winston looked up. I never said it was him. Mr. Harrison immediately shut his mouth. Principal Winston pulled the old envelope from his breast pocket. But I do have a manuscript here that Ethan Blackwood submitted for the school bulletin board last year. We can compare the penmanship. Hazel Brooks started, looking at Ethan. Ethan tightly gripped the straps of his school bag. Principal Winston, how can you just arbitrarily bring out a manuscript for comparison? Principal Winston let out a sigh. Ethan, handwriting reflects the person. You can't put on an act forever. The ledger page and the manuscript were placed side by side on the table. The curve of the hooks, the dots, the way the number 7 was written one glance was enough to see they matched perfectly. Someone in the crowd whispered, they really look identical. Director Lowe picked up the two papers, his expression stern. Ethan, explain yourself. Ethan's Adam's apple bobbed. It was already like this when I found it. Silas Vance suddenly flipped to the inner lining of the IOU ledger's cover. When Mr. Sterling wrapped the cover, he tucked some old newspaper inside. He followed the edge of the brown craft paper and tore it slightly, revealing a layer of crumpled newspaper. On the newspaper were several pencil indentations that were still brand new, as if someone had placed the ledger page over the newspaper to alter the words, and the pressure of the pen had pressed through to the layer beneath. Silas smoothed out the newspaper. Clear, reversed imprints of several lines of text were left on it. One of the lines read, "The Sterling family's ledgers are a mess. Use the chaos to turn the tables." The signature section retained a partial imprint of the name Ethan. Rowena Blackwood lunged forward, trying to snatch it. It's fake! It's all fake! Director Lowe slammed his hand down hard on the newspaper. Stand still. Ethan's face went so pale it was almost transparent. Hazel Brooks stood rooted to the spot, her lips trembling. Ethan, you didn't write these words. Did you? Ethan didn't answer. He looked at Calliope, his gaze shifting little by little from panic to pure, venomous resentment. Calliope Sterling, you won't be satisfied until you've completely ruined me, will you? Calliope laughed out of sheer anger. You stole my family's ledger, altered our IOUs, and now you're saying I'm ruining you? He slammed his hand against the table. If you hadn't chosen Silas in front of everyone, would I have done this? That statement exploded like a bomb. Even Mr. Harrison's expression changed. Ethan, seemingly pushed to a dead end, decisively ripped off his disguise. My grades are better than his. My future is brighter than his. Your family's money should have been used to sponsor the most deserving person. Thaddeus angrily grabbed a chair. On what grounds should my family's money be given to you? Director Lowe stopped him. Ethan Blackwood let out a cold laugh. Mr. Sterling, you just wanted to buy your daughter a prestigious husband. Do you think Silas Vance is any cleaner than I am? His family is drowning in a mountain of debt. Isn't he approaching Calliope just for the money too? Silas stood perfectly straight, but his face grew visibly pale. Calliope knew these words had hit his sore spot. In the eyes of others, even when the poor were treated well, they were always suspected of having ulterior motives. She picked up the IOU from the table and slammed it down in front of everyone. When Silas borrows money, he writes an IOU and pays proper interest. And what about you? Ethan froze. Calliope continued pressing him. Your mother snatched my materials, stomped on our invoices, and threw herself against a doorframe to play the victim. And what did you do? Rowena shrieked. You shut your mouth! Calliope turned to look at her. When you took Vernon Shaw's money, why didn't you shut your mouth? Rowena's shrieking abruptly ceased. All eyes turned toward her. Vernon Shaw panicked. Calliope Sterling, don't spout nonsense. Calliope pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. It was the back of a half-burnt invoice. Last night, Silas discovered the imprint of a wrapper from the traditional medicine shop on it. I went to the medicine shop and asked. A few days ago, Rowena used a crisp, brand-new $50 bill to pay off her gambling debt. The shop owner even thought it was strange, wondering where she had gotten the money. The medicine shop owner had been invited over. He stood at the back of the crowd and spoke in a moderate volume. Rowena did indeed pay off her debt. She even said that from now on, with someone from the supply depot looking out for her, she wouldn't be short on money. Rowena's legs gave out, and she collapsed. Vernon Shaw's face turned ashen as ash. Director Lowe immediately ordered his men to take the two of them into the office for interrogation. The inspection of the supply depot's warehouse continued. At the very bottom of a wooden crate in the back of the warehouse, they found a batch of unsealed digital watches. Stuck to the inside of the crate's lid was half of a shipping label. The origin of the shipment matched exactly, with Thaddeus's 120 missing watches. Vernon Shaw finally couldn't bear the pressure anymore. He confessed that he had used his position as the supply depot's accountant to secretly collude with a southern merchant. Seeing Thaddeus hit the jackpot on his first run of digital watches, Vernon had switched out a portion of the goods during transport. He then used the fake name Blackwood Commerce to bring them into the supply depot for sale. He had stolen Arthur Blackwood's old name stamp from the supply depot's old files left behind from years ago. When Rowena found out, not only did she not report it, but she used it to blackmail him. Ethan's theft of the ledger had been instigated by Rowena. Their initial goal was to gain leverage over the Sterling family and force them to reinstate his sponsorship. The truth up to this point was dirty enough, but the filthiest part was still yet to come. Director Lowe asked Ethan, "Why did you alter the ledgers?" Ethan remained silent for a long time, then suddenly looked at Hazel Brooks. "Because I couldn't afford to lose." Hazel took a step back. Ethan stared intently at her, as if clutching at the last piece of driftwood. "Hazel, you once said I didn't deserve to be humiliated by money." Hazel's face turned stark white. "I never told you to steal ledgers or alter them. But you also said Calliope chose Silas because he was more obedient and compliant." Ethan's voice trembled violently. "You said someone like me didn't deserve to be picked over by the daughter of a peddler." Hazel's lips quivered, unable to utter a single word. The crowd began to murmur and gossip. The very words that had been revered as a sign of her noble and pure disposition in Calliope's past life now felt utterly weightless and profoundly disgusting when placed next to forged ledgers and a blackmail scheme. Ethan suddenly burst into laughter. "You all despise money, but in reality, every one of you wants the Sterling family's money." These words sounded like an insult to others, but also like a slap to his own face. Mr. Harrison's face turned ashen. Every word of defense he had offered for Ethan just moments ago now felt like a slap echoing back onto his own face. Principal Winston sighed. "Ethan, talent is not a veil to cover up wickedness." Ethan jerked his head up. "I just wanted to go to college." Calliope looked at him. "Silas Vance wants to go too." He froze. "Just because you want to go to college, does that mean you get to steal my family's ledgers?" Calliope demanded. "Because you want to go to college, your mother has the right to trample on our invoices and use dirty money from stolen goods to pay off her gambling debts. Just because you want to go to college, is everyone else supposed to just pave the way for you?" With every question thrown at him, his face grew a fraction paler. Rowena suddenly broke free from the officer's grip, lunged forward, and threw herself to her knees at Calliope's feet. "Calliope, I was wrong. For the sake of Ethan's upcoming college entrance exam, please don't call the police. Don't ruin him." In her past life, Rowena had knelt exactly like this. At that time, she had knelt at the door of the Blackwood house, turning Calliope into a laughingstock for the whole town, broadcasting that Calliope had been impure before marriage and had forced her son to marry a tramp. But now, her tears were brushing against the toes of Calliope's shoes. Calliope took a step back. "Go beg the police." Rowena snapped her head up, her eyes filled with venomous resentment. "How can you be so vicious?" Calliope smiled. "I learned it from you." Ethan Blackwood, Rowena Blackwood, and Vernon Shaw were all taken away for investigation. Because the case involved the theft and forgery of ledgers, the distribution of smuggled goods, and the falsification of invoices, the incident alerted the county authorities. Since Ethan was not yet 18, the school ultimately recorded a major demerit on his permanent record and revoked his early admission recommendation for that year. Before the college entrance exam, he still had to cooperate with the ongoing investigation. Rowena was detained for several days for extortion and concealing evidence. By the time she was released, her reputation was completely shattered. Vernon Shaw lost his job as the supply depot accountant and was forced to compensate Thaddeus for the stolen goods. To wash their hands of the matter, the supply depot posted a public notice regarding his disciplinary action. The day the notice was posted, the townsfolk swarmed the corner wall to read it. Those who had been cursing her family just days ago now kept their heads bowed, not daring to look Calliope in the eye. When Thaddeus got the money back for the goods, the first thing he did wasn't to restock inventory, but to call a carpenter to fix the yard gate. He claimed that all their bad luck had slipped in through the cracks of the old gate, so it had to be replaced immediately. 10 days before the college entrance exam, Silas Vance still came to their house for 2 hours every day to help organize the ledgers, getting paid by the day. Every single time, he wrote a proper receipt. Clara felt sorry for how thin he was, and often boiled eggs for him to eat. Refusing to take them for free, he would take the opportunity to fetch water, chop firewood, and fix the chicken coop for her. Once, Clara secretly stuffed 2 steamed buns into his school bag. He made it to the end of the alley before turning back to leave a note on the table. Aunt Clara, consider the buns as part of my meals and just deduct them from my wages. Clara was both amused and exasperated, scolding him for being such a stubborn boy. Silas's ears turned bright red. Sitting by the window doing her homework, Calliope looked up just in time to see him stacking the firewood into incredibly neat, square piles. In that moment, the suffocating, murky breath that had been pressing down on her chest since her past life finally began to dissipate. On the day of the college entrance exam, the gates of the town high school were packed with parents. Ethan Blackwood was also there. In just a short half-month, he had become terrifyingly gaunt. Rowena didn't dare show her face. Rumor had it that her gambling debts and the underground casino had been exposed, and her own side of the family wouldn't even let her step through their door anymore. Hazel Brooks stood at the door of the bookstore across the street, watching him. Ethan saw her, his footsteps faltering slightly, but Hazel abruptly turned and walked back inside the bookstore. This time, the moon no longer shone on him. He brushed past Calliope, his voice thick and hoarse. "Calliope Sterling, are you satisfied now?" Calliope handed over her exam ticket to the proctor for inspection without looking back. "The only person who ruined you is yourself." The exam bell rang. Silas Vance sat diagonally in front of her, the sunlight streaming over his faded, washed-out shirt. He turned to look at Calliope and gave a slight nod. It wasn't a grand promise, nor was it an attempt to curry favor. It was simply his way of telling her not to be afraid. On the day the scores were released, the entire town was more bustling than on New Year's Day. Silas Vance placed first in the county for the science track. Calliope was accepted into a finance college in the city. Ethan Blackwood bombed the exam, barely scraping the minimum cutoff score. Because of the major demerit on his permanent record, his first-choice university rejected him. In the end, he was relegated to a small teacher's college in a remote, rural area. Mr. Harrison held the score sheet, standing in silent shock in his office for a long time without saying a word. Principal Winston, on the other hand, personally came to the Sterling house to offer his congratulations. He patted Silas on the shoulder. "Being poor is nothing to be ashamed of. Using poverty as an excuse to commit evil is what's truly shameful." Silas bowed his head respectfully in agreement. Thaddeus set up 3 banquet tables in the yard to celebrate. This time, no one dared accuse him of throwing money around to buy a reputation. The people who owed them money voluntarily lined up to pay off their debts. Some even brought baskets of eggs, smiling apologetically to make peace. Thaddeus didn't give them a warm reception, but he didn't outright humiliate them either. As a businessman, he knew that while debts had to be settled clearly, one always had to leave a way out for others. Before heading off to college, Silas came by to make his first debt payment. Out of the $300 loan, he paid back $20 up front. It was money he had earned over the summer by repairing radios in the county. Thaddeus rubbed the 2 $10 bills between his fingers, deliberately darkening his expression. "Paying it back so eagerly? Afraid I'll hound you for the rest of your life?" Silas answered deadpan, "I'm just afraid I might forget." Thaddeus was left speechless. He turned and grumbled to Clara, "This kid is as stiff as a wooden board." The corners of Clara's eyes crinkled with laughter. On the day they departed for college in the city, Thaddeus took Calliope to the bus station. Silas was there too. He was carrying an old canvas duffel bag and a sack of hard-boiled eggs that Clara had forced him to take. This time, he didn't refuse. That was because stuck to the bag of eggs was a small note that read, "Meal expenses have been pre-deducted by Thaddeus Sterling." It was her father's handwriting. The green-shelled train pulled into the station, steam billowing thickly. Silas helped Calliope stow her luggage on the overhead rack. The carriage was packed with people pushing and shoving. He stood in the aisle, his forehead beaded with sweat. "Calliope." She looked up. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket. "I put together a list of addresses for the wholesale markets in the city. Electronic components, watch parts, tape recorder, magnetic heads, they're all categorized and clearly labeled." She froze. He avoided her gaze. "You're studying finance, and Mr. Sterling sells digital watches. You might find this useful later." The notebook was very thin, but its corners were already worn soft and frayed. She couldn't begin to imagine how many places he had run to, or how many people he had asked to compile all this information. She took it, her throat suddenly feeling a little tight. "Thank you." The conductor blew the whistle. Just before stepping off the train, Silas suddenly looked back. "Calliope, until I pay off my debt completely, I won't speak of anything else." Before she could even process his words, his ears turned bright red, but his voice remained incredibly steadfast. "Once the debt is paid off, if you are still willing, I will properly ask you." The train doors slid shut right in front of him. He stood on the platform, pushed backward by the surging crowd, but his eyes remained glued to her window. As the train began to roll away, he raised his hand and gave a single wave. The pace of life in the city was much faster than in their small town. During the week, Calliope attended classes, and on weekends, she went to the wholesale market to help her father manage his inventory. Silas, on the other hand, audited radio electronics classes at the teacher's college and apprenticed under a repairman to learn how to solder electronic circuit boards. Every month, he would mail a money order to the Sterling house at $20, 30, 10, 50. The memo line only ever contained 2 words, debt payment. Every time Thaddeus received one, he would grumble, "Does this brat think I'm a bank?" But after complaining, he would always carefully flatten the money order out and place them into the tin box, forbidding anyone from touching them. During her sophomore year of college, electronics from the South became increasingly popular. Thaddeus rented a small stall in the city, specializing in digital watches, pocket calculators, and radio accessories. On days when Calliope had fewer classes, she would go watch the stall. Silas Vance also came to help often, but every time, his hourly wages were calculated clearly and precisely. Once, a Southern trader appeared at the city's wholesale market, bringing a batch of brand new digital watches with shockingly low prices. Thaddeus was tempted and almost put down a deposit. Silas dismantled the sample watch, inspected it for 5 minutes, and then closed the back cover. "Don't buy them. The internal mechanisms are refurbished goods," he said. The Southern trader instantly turned hostile. "What does a little brat like you know?" Silas didn't argue. He simply connected the watch directly to a basic battery tester. The second hand ticked twice and then died completely. The crowd of small vendors watching around them erupted into an uproar. Thaddeus's back was drenched in cold sweat. If this batch had gotten stuck in his hands, several years' worth of savings would have been thrown down the drain. After the Southern trader slipped away without a trace, Thaddeus patted Silas on the shoulder, unable to utter a single word for a long time. That night, upon returning to their rented apartment, Thaddeus brought out the tin box. Inside were all the money orders Silas had sent over the past 2 years. "Calliope," her father said, "his debt is fully paid off." Calliope, who was balancing the ledgers, paused her pen. Silas was standing outside the door, still holding a screwdriver in his hand. The lamplight cast a warm glow on his eyebrows. Compared to the teenage boy who had stood in her family's yard back then, he was now much more steadfast and mature. Thaddeus cleared his throat. "Back then, you said once you paid off the debt, you would ask." Clara poked her head out from the kitchen, unable to hide her smile. Silas's ears turned bright red. He looked at Calliope, his fingers gripping the handle of the screwdriver tightly before hurriedly letting go. Calliope Sterling. She deliberately kept her eyes on the ledger. He stood perfectly straight, just like he was taking an oral exam. "I like you, and not because your family has money." This opening sounded more like a pledge of allegiance. Clara almost laughed out loud but was glared at by Thaddeus, forcing her to duck back into the kitchen. Silas grew even more nervous, but he didn't stop. "That year, when you chose me, at first I was very afraid. It was only later I realized that you weren't choosing someone to be a companion. You were giving me an opportunity to not have to bow my head." Calliope looked up at him. His voice deepened. If you are willing, I want to expand the business with you in the future. We will calculate the ledgers clearly, and every single cent we earn will be transparent and honorable. There was no poetry, no bright moonlight, no such thing as a soul crushed by reality. There were only ledgers, market stalls, and clean, transparently earned money. Yet, Calliope's eyes stung with tears. In her past life, she had endlessly chased after a moon that had never shone on her, forgetting that the earthly fire of the mortal world was the only thing that could truly warm her hands. Calliope asked, "Are you proposing to me right now?" He was stunned, his face flushing slightly. "Not exactly. I haven't bought a ring yet." Thaddeus, standing nearby, impatiently slapped the table. "Just say yes first. There are rings at the stall right next to ours. Just go out there and buy one." The whole family burst into loud laughter. That night, a steady drizzle fell outside. Silas finished repairing the pile of broken digital watches and lined them up neatly on the table. The second hands began to tick again. The tiny ticking sounds merged together, exactly like a belated destiny finally returning to its rightful track. After graduation, Calliope didn't take the state-assigned accounting job. Instead, she, Silas, and her father registered and founded an electronics store called Vance Sterling Electronics. The name was finalized by her father. He claimed that the name Sterling was too rigid, and Vance sounded too cold, so Vance Sterling sounded much more like a proper establishment opened by genuinely cultured people. Clara glared at him sharply, telling him he was just being pretentious. They started off selling digital watches, and later expanded into pocket calculators, Walkmans, and radios for students. Silas was in charge of repairs and inventory, Calliope handled the finances and contracts, Thaddeus negotiated prices, and Clara was in charge of cooking and scolding everyone. The business grew steadily. In their third year, someone from the town came to the city for goods and brought news of Ethan Blackwood. After graduating from the teacher's college, he had been assigned to teach at a middle school in a mountainous region. Unable to endure the hardship, he resigned and came to the city. Hazel Brooks's book cafe had opened for half a year, but because she had no business sense, she lost everything. The two of them had dated for a while, but eventually broke up over money disputes. Rowena Blackwood had borrowed from loan sharks, and the debt collectors were constantly blockading her door demanding their money. The man from their hometown chattered on endlessly, thoroughly absorbed in his own storytelling. Thaddeus, however, stopped Calliope from listening. It's bad luck. But sometimes, fate truly loves to push figures from the past, right back in front of you. That winter, their store was hiring a warehouse manager. A man in an old, worn-out padded jacket stood outside the door, his face noticeably gaunt. Calliope stared for a long time before finally recognizing him as Ethan Blackwood. Ethan recognized her, too. The job application form in his hand was crumpled from being squeezed so tightly. Behind the counter, Silas Vance was replacing a watch strap for a customer. He looked up, saw Ethan, paused for barely half a second, and then continued tightening the screws. Ethan stood for a very long time before walking up to Calliope. "Calliope, I'm here to apply for the job." His voice was no longer as clear and crisp as it had been back then. It was laced with a hoarseness, worn down by life itself. Calliope took the application form. Under education, it listed his teacher's college. Under work experience, it was blank for half a year. His requested salary was a full $30 lower than what they paid their regular warehouse managers. "Why come here?" Calliope asked. A flash of humiliation crossed Ethan's face. "I need a job." The new apprentice, unaware of their shared history, enthusiastically poured a cup of tea and offered it to him. Ethan didn't take it. He looked at the shelves lined up in rows inside the store, his gaze a complicated mix of emotions tinged with bitterness. All of these things, the business funds, the wholesale channels, her parents' trust, and even Calliope's life had originally been stolen by him in her past life. In this life, he had to stand outside the counter, waiting for her nod of approval just for a job as a warehouse manager. Callio placed the application form flat on the counter. "You're not a good fit." His face turned chalky white. "I can take a lower salary." "It's not about the salary," she looked at him. "A warehouse manager has to manage the ledgers, the inventory, and the keys. You have a criminal record." Her voice wasn't loud, but it immediately made it impossible for him to lift his head. The young apprentice froze, looking at him, then at Calliope. Ethan's lips trembled. "I've already taken my punishment for what happened back then. That punishment was decided by the school and the Commerce Department, not by me." She pushed the application form back toward him. "I have no obligation to trust you a second time." The rims of Ethan's eyes grew red. "Can't you just let me go?" The words were laughably familiar. Back when he stole her family's ledgers, he had also claimed she was ruining him. Now, when rejected for a job, he was again saying she wouldn't let him go. Calliope replied calmly, "You can go anywhere to find a job. just not here. Silas handed the repaired watch back to the customer and walked over to Calliope's side. He didn't say a word, simply closing the ledger he was holding. Ethan looked at Silas and suddenly let out a laugh. "You won." Silas replied in a flat tone, "I was never competing with you." Ethan's smile stiffened. At that moment, another woman walked through the door. She wore old glasses and a scarf that had been washed until it was frayed and pilling. It was Hazel Brooks. When she saw Calliope, her expression became incredibly unnatural. Upon seeing Ethan, her footsteps halted. The two of them stood only a few steps apart. Neither of them spoke first. Back then, they thought poetry and a noble aura could withstand the daily grind of bills and groceries. Only later did they realize that rent money didn't know how to recite poetry, and debt collectors couldn't care less about anyone's ideals. Hazel Brooks finally stepped up to the counter. "I'd like to buy some notebooks and cassette tapes wholesale." She was currently running a small bookstall, selling study materials and blank cassette tapes. Calliope wrote her an invoice at the standard wholesale price. Hazel was stunned. "You're not going to make things difficult for me?" Calliope asked in return. "You're buying goods, and I'm running a business. Why would I make things difficult for you?" Hazel's face grew even paler. Sometimes, the most humiliating thing wasn't revenge, but the fact that the other party saw you as nothing more than an ordinary customer, nothing more, nothing less. "Hazel," Ethan Blackwood called out softly. Hazel looked back at him. Her eyes no longer held the radiant light they had in her past life. "Ethan, right now, I just want to try my best to keep this stall afloat." After saying that, she hugged her goods and walked straight out. Ethan stood rooted to the spot, as if someone had pulled out the very last thread holding him together. When he left, it was snowing outside. No one chased after him. Thaddeus walked out from the back room, holding a cup of hot tea in his hands. "He left?" Calliope nodded. Thaddeus let out a snort. Back then, he despised the smell of peddler's money. Now, that same money won't even take him in. Clara swatted his shoulder. "Say a few words less. It's not easy for the kids." Calliope looked at the footprints in the snow outside the door, quickly trampled into slush by passersby. "There's nothing uneasy about it, Mom," she said. It was the truth. Once resentment was met with justice, it would no longer continue to rot inside the heart. Later on, their store became a company. Silas Vance led a team to manufacture electronic components themselves, catching the wave of home appliance repairs, and orders poured in more and more. Thaddeus went from being the town's $10,000 household to a prominent boss in the city. However, he never again slammed a stack of cash on a table and forced someone to choose. He said you couldn't evaluate people like that. Character had to be examined carefully, and accounts had to be kept strictly clear. On the day Calliope and Silas got married, the wedding banquet was set up right in the new factory. There were no flashy displays of wealth, just red paper decorations, round tables, piping hot food, and laughter echoing throughout the yard. Principal Winston came. Mr. Harrison came too. Mr. Harrison's hair had grayed significantly. He brought over a glass of wine to apologize to Calliope. "Back then, my bias toward Ethan almost ruined your whole family." Thaddeus took the glass of wine on her behalf. "It's in the past. Just don't look solely at grades from now on, Mr. Harrison." Mr. Harrison smiled bitterly and nodded. Silas held Calliope's hand as they went around making toasts. The palm of his hand was warm. Someone teased him, demanding he say a few words. Standing in front of everyone, he still wasn't good at speaking flowery words. "Thank you everyone for coming to celebrate," he said. The whole yard burst into good-natured laughter. Thaddeus, standing nearby, impatiently muttered a reminder. "Talk about Calliope. Praise Calliope." Silas looked at Calliope. The light from the bulbs reflected in his eyes, very bright, very steady. "The luckiest thing in my life was being chosen by her right in the Sterling family's yard." The whole yard paused for a beat, he continued. "But what I want to thank her for the most is not that she chose me." He squeezed Calliope's hand tighter. "It's that in all the days that followed, every single day, she made me feel that I was neither a purchased commodity nor a recipient of charity." Calliope's eyes grew hot with tears. Silas's voice was deep, but every word was resolute and clear. "Calliope Sterling, I will spend the rest of my life settling all my debts to you, by walking the right path and protecting this family well." Thunderous applause erupted around them. Thaddeus turned his back to wipe away his tears, stubbornly refusing to admit he was crying and muttering that the smoke had just gotten into his eyes. After the wedding, Clara handed the tin box over to Calliope. Inside the box was the IOU from that year, all of the money orders, the half-burnt invoice, and even the very first receipt Silas had written. Pressed at the very bottom was a yellowed piece of paper bearing the words her father had written years ago. "You chose him yourself." Calliope looked at those words and suddenly realized something. In her past life, she had chosen the wrong person, and as a result, she had entrusted her very life to the wrong hands. In this life, she hadn't bought any moon to bring home. She had simply pulled a man out of the mud, someone who was willing to stand shoulder to shoulder with her and walk forward together.
What a satisfying ending! There's no shame in being poor, but using it to justify greed is just wrong. In the end, sincerity and fair play always win out. What was your favorite part? Let me know in the comments.